Welcome into the Thunder basketball universe. We're recording this episode on Tuesday, October 8th. That means the Thunder has one preseason game under its belt. The preseason is in full effect. It's in full motion. And Nick and I actually just got back from San Antonio last night. First of all, it just felt so good to be back at it, back on the road, traveling with this group. I mean, it's just, you're back in kind of that flow of the season a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hits you a little bit like a ton of bricks in that, you're kind of gearing up. You've got media day and then, 7 practices in 5 days or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're back on the road. It's just like, what we were doing 4 months ago. And you're kind of right immersed again in a game, in a broadcast. And fortunately, I mean, our crew, Chris Fisher, Michael Cage, they were in midseason form.
I mean, back like they never left, truly.
Producer Steve Melton, director Eric Date, those guys were just humming. I mean, our whole crew was ready to rock. I think, we held down the fort a little bit.
I think we did what we needed to do. I think it was pretty good. Yeah. And also shout out to our guy, Chris Josephson, because he sent an entire preseason stat packet. I was like, oh, that's how you know we are back when we get the stats from CJ.
Really rolling. It was a great trip down to San Antonio.
Yeah.
Thunder did not have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Lou Dort in the game. They just rested. Cool thing that I noticed, though, at shoot-around down there, they were wearing the red scout team jerseys during
which never happens.
Yeah, and these guys, they knew that they weren't going to play that night, just normal rest in the flow of preseason. And they're out there like helping their teammates get better, going through offensive and defensive drills, helping those guys prepare for the game later that night. I thought that was a great display of selflessness, cohesiveness, and just intentionality when it comes to like everything that they're doing out there with the team.
It was a really sharp shoot around. You could tell that these guys were locked in, kind of excited to get a chance to go up against somebody that wasn't also in a Thunder uniform. I think they were really, really excited about that. But also at shoot around, we got a chance to talk to rookie AJ Mitchell for the first time. And great guy to talk to. You could tell he was very excited. But I asked him what it was like for him being on his first NBA road trip and how he felt. And he was like, it's really fun. It's kind of like 2K.
Yeah.
I know. It was at that moment that I realized I've kind of aged out.
Yeah, I was like I'm old. Yeah.
I'm old. It's like, it's so much like 2K, you're on this, chartered flight and you're at this nice hotel eating good food. I was like, oh, the 2K reference.
Yeah, classic.
Went over my head a little bit.
Yeah, but that's like, these are all the little experiences that these players are picking up. And so him and Dylan Jones and, Alex Dukas and, some of these guys that are experiencing these things for the first time. Nikola Topic was there as well in San Antonio, just kind of along doing his rehab, but still being immersed in the team. And even the new guys who are veterans, Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex Caruso. I know that we're going to get to them in a little bit, but those guys getting to kind of absorb what it's like to be a part of this Thunder roster. And Isaiah Hartenstein delivered just one of the best quotes post game.
So good.
Yeah, and he just talked about how this whole team is so unselfish, and the thought process is, there's no personal agendas. It's just, what can we do to win? How can I make the next guy's life a little bit easier? And so he said it makes it really special when you have talent like that, but an attitude like that as well.
It's pretty rare. It's pretty rare because you can get a lot of talented guys together and everybody's looking out for themselves, have their own personal agendas.
Right.
But this group has really good heads on their shoulders. And so you could tell a lot of these guys, most of them, all of them, looked very comfortable out there together. And that was something that Coach Dagnall said post-game. So let's get into a quick recap of how this game went, because it did seem like this group was very comfortable together. But of course, there's going to be ebbs and flows. Yeah. It was the very first game of the preseason, so a lot to learn and take away from. But ultimately, the Thunder did walk away with a 112-107 win over San Antonio. And we got a little bit of everything in this game. I mean, like a lot of lineups, but also a kind of a close game down the stretch. I mean, we really could. There was a lot to take away from this game.
It was a preseason game.
It was a preseason game. Yeah.
The kind of starters and second unit played the entire first half.
Yep.
Different kind of lineup in that second half. The starting group had built, I believe it was a 13-point lead heading into halftime. So really, it was pretty dominant in that first half, registered 36 points in the paint, ended up with 66 total in the game, did the Thunder. And then in the second half, you got some of those guys that are sort of on the back end of the roster, some of the two-way guys like Adam Flagler, Alex Dukas, who I mentioned, and then the training camp invitees, Cormac Ryan, and a few of the other guys there who have come in. And those guys had a chance to try to close out a game on the road against, players that are sort of at their same caliber. And so you had multiple different games all in one.
Yeah, those last kind of I think like 2 minutes, but really like the last 30 seconds, the intensity picked up.
Yes,
It took like 3 notches up, and it was about a 4-point game with 30 seconds left. And you could tell San Antonio was like, okay, we're going to take advantage of this opportunity to try to get some real game situational, experience in. And that in turn gave the Thunder an opportunity to do the exact same thing with a lot of the, training camp invitees, a lot of the new guys, AJ Mitchell, Dylan Jones, like these guys were incorporated in this mix. And Coach Dagnall said at the end of the game, like, the end of the game is a game in itself. And so that gives us some real film that we can now go back, look at, and kind of start this process of information gathering and observation over training camp.
Yeah, and even the guys that weren't on the floor, the veteran guys, can learn from those moments too. One thing I would really encourage you to do is if the Thunder's in some of these situations again over the next 4 preseason games, keep an eye on the bench and the veteran guys who are over there cheering on these young players, these development players. And just recognizing how excited they are for these guys to get that opportunity to try to win a game in crunch time.
Everybody's all about the team. And it's just so fun to watch how everybody stays engaged in those moments. Another thing from this game, kind of big theme, the points in the paint and the differential in the points in the paint. The Thunder finished with 56 points in the paint compared to just 36 for San Antonio. But the biggest key here is the difference in the amount of field goals attempted in the paint. This was massive because both teams shot above 50% in the paint. However, San Antonio only had 35 field goal attempts in the paint for this game, and the Thunder, in turn, had 51, which is a pretty big number.
Yeah, massive. And it's exactly to the identity. We've talked about system fundamentals for the Thunder and what they want to be about. And that's a core one is, can we get downhill? The guys that we saw getting downhill were also ones that were a little bit different than maybe what we had seen in the last year or so. It was Chet Holmgren. It was Cason Wallace, who were straight line drives all the way to the rack. Nobody stopping them. They beat their man. They found a way to get around those screening actions. And, J-Dub, of course, did his thing as well. But seeing some of these other guys get those opportunities to really carve really nice driving lanes into the defense was very encouraging.
A lot of really good action, great one more passes, advanced passes. I mean, really, the offense looked like this group had been playing together for a while. And so that's where kind of the comfort level that Coach Dagnall was talking about was really showing up. And another area I kind of want to talk about is this is a preseason game, so you don't want to extrapolate too much out of this, but it was an opportunity for the Thunder to go up against a team that they didn't know what they were going to roll out, right? So there's a massive variable there that they couldn't quite prepare for.
And they didn't prepare.
And they
intentionally.
Didn't.
They did not do like a whole lot of game planning heading into this.
Correct, because this is very much about the Thunder in this part of the season. And so for San Antonio, they rolled out a gameplay that was they played really fast. They were trying to get out in transition. And so for the Thunder, it really stressed and tested that transition defense. And Coach Dagnall said that was an area that we're going to have to work to clean up, actually, just moving throughout the rest of training camp, our rotations defensively, because San Antonio also wanted to play downhill. They also wanted to get out in transition. So that area really highlighted for the Thunder some areas of improvement throughout the rest of this training camp.
Yeah, that help defense, being the low man, which they mean is the guy that kind of pulls over and protects the rim from the weak side. Those execution points are things to kind of think about as this team moves forward into this back-to-back that we have starting tomorrow. But if I were just to kind of put a bow on this performance in game one, it was cohesive offense. 34 assists to just 15 turnovers in this very first game. Very impressive for the first time out for this team. And then defensively, 13 steals, 10 blocks, a very disruptive performance on the defensive end.
That says Thunder identity, if nothing else does. And that's exactly how this group wants to play. Okay, that's a perfect transition into what's next for us, which has made you look. Because we've had a lot thrown our way here over training camp and in this first preseason game. So, Nick, what made you look from last night?
What made me look was someone actually not looking. And that was
trickery.
That was Isaiah Hartenstein not looking when he threw a pass over the top of his head to the baseline to Alex Caruso for one of Hartenstein's 7 assists in the game. I think Hartenstein played like 15 minutes, maybe something like that. 17 minutes, and he had seven assists to go with 8 rebounds and 4 points. This was the type of performance that I think Thunder fans were really ready to kind of gobble up from Hartenstein. A connecting piece on offense, a physical presence down low with just the sheer number of rebounds that he had. But this pass where Hartenstein's driving to his left, Caruso had kind of cleared out and was going to clear to the backside to get back into that back corner. Well, by the time Caruso turned his head back around, the ball was right in his lap, basically. Hartenstein dropped it right on him, and Caruso nailed that little 10, 15-foot jumper.
Right there on the baseline, a little mid-range jumper. And I love what Isaiah said after the game. He was like, I was just hoping that Alex saw the ball.
Yes,
He definitely wasn't expecting it. And then we heard from Alex today. He was like, that came very quickly. And I'm going to get a little bit better at that because I know that Isaiah is very capable of throwing those types of passes.
And these are the little execution points that Mark and the team is talking about. Like, yes, really solid performance. Everybody, brimming happy after getting to play that first game. But there are so many areas that this team wants to and needs to improve upon heading into the season. And so those two guys, just that little chemistry point of like Caruso, kind of keeping his head on a swivel, Hartenstein making sure that, he's delivering those passes on time, on target. Those two guys will continue to work together in tandem as they start to forge those connections.
One other part of Isaiah's game that I really appreciated, and I actually made a note about it in my notes during the game, was that his first bucket came at the end of the first quarter, like at the kind of towards the very, very end. And before that, he had 4 rebounds and 2 assists. And he felt like he was so impactful and his fingerprints were all over the game before even scoring a bucket. And this goes to what we heard about Isaiah from coaches and from players and his teammates, just about that he's a very well-rounded guy, outside of his ability to, rebound and score. He's a great, communicator defensively. He also has a great ability to connect the floor and keep things moving. And so some of those intangible things really showed up, I think, in this first quarter of this game.
Yeah, and we got to see him play alongside Chet Holmgren. Yeah. Hartenstein did not start. He and Caruso both came off the bench. But very quickly, we saw these different pairings and combinations that the Thunder can go to. We saw Chet and Hartenstein playing together. We saw a front court that was Dylan Jones and Ousmane Dieng. And the Thunder, the variance that OKC has at its disposal to play any different type of way to really put the opposing team on its heels in terms of not knowing what to expect on a given night, could prove to be very, very valuable. So, Paris, what made you look?
All right, here's what made me look. The Thunder's Charge Club is growing exponentially.
Uh-oh.
It is getting so
one new player per game.
Large. Yes. So in this last game, Dylan Jones, Thunder rookie, took 2 charges, 2 of them. In my head, I'm thinking to myself, all right, let's go down the list now because the list is grand of players who are very capable and league leaders in drawing offensive fouls and taking charges. Dylan Jones now has 2 in his first preseason game.
Right.
All right, Dylan Jones. Lou Dort, second in the NBA in offensive fouls drawn last season with 56. Alex Caruso, by the way, was 4th in the NBA in offensive fouls drawn. Let's switch to charges. Jalen Williams, Isaiah Joe, both tied for 6th in charges drawn last season. And then Kenrich Williams, 12th last season in charges drawn. And so now you have all of these guys with just the ground attack, the ground protection of protecting the rim. And then you add in a guy like Chet Holmgren. You add in a guy like J-Dub and his, really long wingspan. You add in a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein. They're kind of the air attack, right?
Yes,
they're protecting the rim from above. And in my head, I'm like, if I'm a guard driving downhill, I get past the first line of defense, but then Dylan Jones is going to slide over and take a charge, or Isaiah Hartenstein is going to swat the shot from above.
And that's even if you get around the screen, because Lou Dort or
exactly.
Jason Wallace or whoever might be able to draw an offensive foul there. I'll add one more guy, AJ Mitchell. Pulled one of those Lou Dort calls where he hustling around a screen, draws a moving screen call. And so yet again, Thunder players, sort of absorbing by osmosis, like what this team wants to be about. Really great showing from the 2 rookies in terms of just the level of confidence that they brought into the game, not overthinking, just going out and playing. Jason Wallace had a great line after the game.
So good.
He said, they got at it, yo.
At it, yo.
And it was great. Jason had some great personality last night in the post-game press conference, so that was really cool.
I talked to Coach Dagnall about this because the Thunder aren't practicing charges. Let's be very clear. They're not practicing charges. They're not emphasizing charges or offensive fouls drawn. That's just something that happens in the locker room. They're like, how many do you have? They're like, there's a little bit of a competition.
Jay Will told a story about how he took one and he looked over at the bench last season because he knew that he had surpassed Kenrich Williams in the list. So he wanted to make sure that Kenrich saw that he was ahead in the list.
It's a very healthy competition.
Yeah, I was going to say, your players are competitive. You would like them to, compete.
Yes.
This is a perfect thing for them to compete for.
Perfect. A game within the game, just to keep everybody on their toes.
Yeah.
But to my point, the Thunder aren't practicing these sort of
Right.
plays in training camp and in practice. What they're focusing on is the willingness to do whatever it takes to, compete and protect the rim, and also positioning. And so the charges, the offensive fouls, those are outcomes of what the Thunder's defense wants to be about, being in the right spot and having each other's backs, that's exactly what a charge is.
Yeah, and Kaysen really credited the work that the Thunder has done over the last week plus to get them to that point where they were ready to execute defensively the way that they did. Obviously, still a long way to go, a lot of steps ahead. They weren't playing against a fully loaded Spurs roster. And so, though this is a good sort of initial morsel to take, absorb, digest, and then move on to, bigger and bigger obstacles moving forward.
All right, so let's move on now into what to watch for the remainder of this preseason, because now after a week of training camp, a nice preseason game under our belts, we have enough intel, I believe, enough nuggets of information to give you just things to keep an eye on as we move through the remainder of these 4 preseason games. And I think it's safe to say the first thing to keep your eye on is the lineups. And not exactly what they are, but the amount of them.
Yes.
Because there is a multitude of options that the Thunder can go to in terms of player combinations. We saw a double big lineup with Chet and Isaiah, like you mentioned, but we also saw a very small lineup with essentially J-Dub and Dylan Jones as kind of the bigs, quote unquote, of those lineups. And so there is a lot of different directions the Thunder can go in, and that's the point of training camp, is to be able to tinker and kind of get more information about how these lineups could look.
And not just lineups, not just what those lineups, can do, but basically whether the Thunder system is holding up under the pressure of those different types of lineups. And so there's a dual purpose there. I mean, I think sometimes in the NBA when, fans hear that a team, really wants to experiment and they want to try a lot of different things, the perception could be that they're just doing it for the sake of doing it.
Right.
It's more like, let's explore what our system, what we're teaching, whether that holds up. And this is a great way for the Thunder to learn about, okay, if we're pressuring the ball this way, if we're having our defense cover things this way, if we're having our offense operate this way, is this realistic if X, Y, and Z players are on the floor?
Right.
Or do we need to rethink that when we actually see it in practice? It's one thing to have sort of these theoretical ideas. It's another for it to actually go out there on the floor against a live opponent. And that's what the Thunder is really using this time for, is to see, wait, can we actually execute that the way that we think that we can theoretically?
And just to take this a step further, going back to last season, one thing that Coach Dagnall often referred to was, we want to set the precedent, essentially, that indicates every player, if you're in a jersey, you are alive, and there is a potential that you could be out there on the floor. And so for OKC last year, there were a lot of situations where it was like, oh, okay, this player's in the game all of a sudden, and that's not his normal rotation, or maybe we're going to swap this guy for this guy, and it's just keeping players in that state of unknown, unpredictability, and letting that be a strength, and kind of setting that precedent now during preseason, that throughout the rest of this season, we have the freedom to be able to just kind of like do whatever is necessary for us in given whatever the game is showing us. And it's up to the players to be ready for that. And that's kind of what the precedent has been set over the last few years too.
That's a muscle that has been trained, basically, that these guys can be adaptable. And the cool thing is, you've got some rookies that are coming in who have played various different roles for the teams that they're coming from. You've got 2 veterans in Hartenstein and Caruso. That's been their whole life in the NBA, is just getting in where they can fit in. Right. And so you're not bringing guys in who are used to having things set a very certain way. They're pretty adaptable as well. And so hopefully, as we've heard from some other players, like, there's a lot of confidence that these guys are going to just mesh pretty easily.
Definitely. Yeah. The other thing to really keep your eye on throughout the rest of the preseason is system fundamentals. And so this is something you've probably heard a lot throughout training camp if you're, watching on YouTube, the media availabilities and such. But what they mean by that is Is the team competing on both ends of the floor? Are we moving the ball the way we want to? Are we getting downhill? Are we getting back in transition? Are we having each other's backs? Are we communicating? Those are the things outside of outcomes. Those are not that is not the point of preseason. The outcomes of games, score, how many points scored, all of those things are not the focus. The focus is on how this group is able to maintain and sustain their system fundamentals regardless of environment.
Yeah, and now they've got one game to take a look and see, whether they lived up to that. And then they're going to have 2 more here in the next 48 hours to determine, okay, where are we at, after this little stretch of time. I really like the way that the schedule is set up in that they then have this big gap. They're going to have practices on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah.
And then, an opportunity to play a game at Denver, and then a final game back at home against Atlanta to round out the preseason slate. And so you get this window of like, okay, we can get 2 really good, solid practices in to evaluate what we did in those first 3 games. Then we get another crack at it. And then we've got a whole week in between to really assess the whole thing.
Yeah. And the point to remember is that the Thunder is taking the long view here and keeping in mind it is a very long season, and this is just game 1 of the preseason. And so it's all about information gathering and starting that process that the Thunder does all season long of taking in information, reviewing it, working on it, getting better, applying it to the next situation, taking the information from that game. And so now that ball is now starting to roll into the regular season.
Yeah, and recognizing that it's not going to be a straight line from here either. There's going to be slippage. There's going to be times where, the ball doesn't bounce the right way, but there's also going to be time where the guys just don't have it that night. And so there's going to be honest assessment along the way, that truth box that they call, the film room. And so the guys will definitely work through all of that. And as Sam Presti says, it's going to thunderstorm on this team 2 or 3 times this year, just like it will all the other 29 teams. And so steeling themselves for that right now in the preseason, obviously very important.
A really good starting point for the Thunder, though, with that first performance in San Antonio. Really good performance for them there. So here is what is up next for this Thunder roster. 4 more preseason games, and it starts with a back-to-back. Yeah. Oh, boy. 3 games in 4 nights, really hitting the ground running for the Thunder. Their next game is on Wednesday here inside of Paycom Center against the Houston Rockets. Then they're going to go to Tulsa to take on the New Zealand Breakers. I always get so excited to get a chance to go up to Tulsa. We don't get to go there throughout the regular season very often.
Stop us and say hi if you're at the BOK Center. Please. If you don't get a chance to come down to Paycom Center too often, definitely let us know. We love to meet people who are watching the show.
Yeah, so the Thunder will be in Tulsa on Thursday, taking on the New Zealand Breakers. And then it's going to be a kind of a chill week following that, taking on the Denver Nuggets in Denver on Tuesday, and then wrapping things up at home against Atlanta on Thursday. One note that we got out of practice today is that as of right now, we're recording this on Tuesday, October 8th. As of right now, the Thunder's expecting everybody to be available for the next game on Wednesday. Without Cason Wallace. That's the only guy.
Well, they're going to evaluate Cason on Wednesday morning. He had a very mild ankle sprain. And so just going to kind of see how he comes out of practice and recovery here today on Tuesday. So, check the social medias tomorrow morning in case we get some more updates on that. As we mentioned, Shea and Lou, they were just out for rest up down in San Antonio. And then just a reminder that Kenrich Williams, with his knee, the procedure that he had, Jalen Williams, Jay Will, he is also going to be out here for a little bit with that hamstring. Both those guys are going to be reevaluated at the end of the preseason schedule.
That's correct. So going to see some more different lineups out there again. And it's a lot to look forward to. And once again, it's preseason, so just make sure you take that long view, but it's still a lot of fun. And first opportunity to be in Paycom Center on Wednesday in preseason, I am ready. I am so excited. And I know this group is excited to see that Thunder faithful again.
Yeah, I just can't wait to see the fans in the building again and the guys sort of soaking up that love here at home. So it should be great.
It should be so much
come on down. Yeah.
And if you see us in Tulsa on Thursday, wave us down, say hello. We'd love to see you. But that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.